Maki is applying to graduate schools. In oceanography, she loves orcas. Ask her about her orca someday. She has all sorts of fun stories. But she's also, somewhat because of her work in the lab and because of the biochemistry and the applied aspect, developed an interest in toxicology in the oceanography context. So how are we poisoning our oceans? Kind of important to understand. And along that lines, she has received an acceptance to one graduate program and is going on an interview in a couple of days. And we have more that I anticipate will be coming in. Maki was also recognized as one of the top undergraduate students by the Society of Toxicology as she was awarded a travel grant. She will be going to their international meeting in Anaheim, California to present her research. So 22 students in the country, 21 students in the country got it. 2 of them came from King. It's pretty good odds in our favor, if not in everybody else's favor. So Kelly Rivenbark will also be joining Maki, and you'll get to hear about her research later in the semester. We're ready?
We're trying to find the airplane.
Oh, you're disconnected?
While they are working on that, I thought of another really important announcement. Those of you who are looking for permanent jobs or summer jobs, the Eastman Limited Service Employee application is going to open up in the next week. And what that is it allows you, you're excited, I can tell. Yeah, I can't wait. It allows you to work at Eastman as a summer technician on 12-hour shifts on the summer, and as kind of almost a way for them to test you out. How good are you as an employee? Many of our former students have done this. It pays well. It's great experience. It requires that you've had Organic 1 and 2 and basically one other chemistry course, which a lot of you will have had by summer. So that link is posted on Canvas, within the Canvas site, and you should go and look at it if you're interested and see what you need to prepare to post it on the site, because it's only open for about a week or so, right?
Yes, have your stuff ready to go before it posts, because it is sort of first come, first serve. Also, for those of you who just want to catch it in the hallway, I put the skinny for that up on my board. So you got the link up there if you want to photograph it or whatever.
We had, several years ago, we had 2 students that did it. That opened the door. They walked into full-time employment right after that. One of those students, Eastman is paying for her to get her master's, and the other one is interviewing with the most competitive, some of the most competitive PhD programs in the country now, partly because of her work experience at Eastman that was helped by getting into the LSE. So, if you're interested, go do it. Go apply. So, continuing with the theme of students that are applying and pursuing their own independent research, our next speaker is Lauren Campbell. Lauren is also a senior, but unlike Maki, she is from around these parts. So, Lauren graduated from
Cornerstone Christian College.
Okay, and is at King. She is a major.
Oh, biology, human track.
I can never keep them straight. There's too many of you all. And Lauren is interested in attending PT school. So you might think, why is someone who wants to go to PT school doing research? Well, Lauren, when you went to your interviews, what did they say?
So one of the things that they specifically said stood out about my application was my research in undergrad. It's really uncommon for people with kind of a clinical track. So they really like that. And actually in grad school, even in PT school, all the ones that I looked at required you to do research before graduating. So it's kind of nice to have a leg up on that already.
So PT school is getting more and more competitive. You want to be able to stand out. This is an opportunity, an option for some of you to follow in Lauren's footsteps. She is going to tell you more about what she did this summer, and like some other students, Lauren initiated this from the ground up. This is all her. We were just there to support her along the way. So, with that, she's going to tell you more about why you want to cringe when you look at that image.
All right, so thank you so much, Dr. Vaughn, for that introduction. So as she mentioned, this project was kind of something I've been working on ever since the summer to now. But I'm going to be talking to you guys about the correlation of core stability, fundamental movement patterns, and incidence of lower extremity injury in collegiate athletes. So just as a warning, if you get a little squeamish by looking at images like this, there's going to be several more throughout the presentation. So if this bothers you, feel free to look away. It won't hurt my feelings or anything like that. But going into this, Dr. Vaughn mentioned that this is my own independent research. So I was actually a recipient of the Ledford Scholarship, which is given out by the Appalachian College Association every year. So it's actually paid student-proposed independent research. So I developed the whole plan of study, everything that went into this project. It was really kind of started by me. I had Dr. Landis, Dr. Cornforth, Dr. Vaughn, and Dr. Laura Ong all kind of supporting me and helping me with this. This is a really great opportunity to kind of take something on and really take ownership of a project. And you can do it in anything, not even just biology. There's all kinds of presentations at the Ledford Scholars Summit. So it's a really interesting opportunity if you guys are interested in doing it. I think the deadline for the application is like mid-February or something, so feel free to do it. 28. So feel free to talk to me after this or sometime before then. I'd be more than happy to share my experiences with it. So before we get too much into this, we have to define a few terms. So starting off, what is core stability? So when a lot of people think about the core, they think kind of like this. So more like the six-pack. So obviously not quite like this. It's not exactly bread, but they're really thinking of kind of that nice defined six-pack. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. When we're talking about the core, what we're really talking about is the trunk of the body. So up here in red, you see all of the muscles that are kind of comprising of what we call the trunk. And when I say stability, I really want you guys to think of control. So a more correct definition, other than just the six-pack for the core, would be the lumbo-hip-pelvic complex. So all of these muscles, it's not just, as I mentioned, the six-pack. It is the interaction of all of these muscles surrounding the core that act kind of as a core set to brace the spine and keep the optimal posture. So it's not just one group of it, we're looking at the interaction of them all together. And so it's the stable foundation of the axial skeleton. So for those of you who haven't had A&P, axial skeleton is defined as the trunk, and then your appendicular skeleton would be your limbs, so your arms and your legs. So a stable foundation of the axial skeleton leads to optimal movement of the appendicular skeleton. So you'll see here as well, I have these two muscles specifically outlined. So that's your multifidus muscle and your transverse abdominis. So these are two muscles that are part of the core, but they're really kind of our key main players that I want you guys to remember. They're the ones that are really responsible, or kind of the biggest players, as I would say, supporting that spine. So if you see the multifidus specifically runs against the spine, and the transverse abdominis just covers this whole area here. So that kind of gives us the foundation for looking at to why does this and how does this relate to lower extremity injury. Well, in order to get into this a little bit deeper, we'll have to talk about the action of the prime movers. So prime movers are muscles that are on the appendicular skeleton. The force that they produce generates movement. So what we're going to specifically talk about in this example is your rectus femoris. So that is your biggest quad muscle. It originates on your ASIS, which is just your most anterior and superior part of your pelvis, so kind of right here. And then it's going to insert all the way down here on the tibial tuberosity, which is just underneath the kneecap. So the biggest thing that the rectus femoris does is hip flexion. So when I contract it, it brings my hip up, and you'll kind of notice if you stick your hand here, you do a little bit of a tilting pelvis. It goes a little bit back. So what happens when we do that contraction? So obviously hip flexion is one of the prime moves of any kind of sport-specific movement. So jumping, running, cutting, any of those things you're going to be using your rectus femoris. So if my spine is not braced, so if these core muscles, specifically the multifidus and the transverse abdominis, is not doing its job of bracing the spine, when I contract that muscle and I have that pelvis tilt, if my spine is not braced, you're also going to have a tilting of the spine. So in shifting that spine, it's going to decrease your body control. So think about it, if you have shifted pelvis, shifted spine, your center mass, which is kind of located in your pelvis, is going to be tilting as well. So that's going to decrease your body control. And if you have improper movement or decreased body control, that's kind of a recipe for disaster, especially along with these high-risk movements of running, jumping, and cutting. That's kind of a recipe for disaster of increased risk of lower extremity injury. So if that isn't enough to scare you, why does core stability matter? Well, athletes are at a higher risk for musculoskeletal injury than regular people, and that's just at the volume of high-risk movements that they're doing. They're more active, they're doing more of these dangerous types of movements. Also, the risk for subsequent injury increases after you've sustained one lower extremity injury. That's even considering the surgery and rehab went perfectly fine. Once you have an injury, you're at risk for having another one regardless. Also, just the normal ACL reconstruction, so it's just the basic level of care of surgery and rehab, is a little over $13,000. Now, a lot of this is covered by insurance, but some of it, depending on your insurance, can be out of pocket. There's a lot of money to spend on ACL reconstruction. So all of this background leads me to think that athletes who demonstrate a deficiency in core stability are more likely to report a history of increased lower extremity injury and/or surgery compared to athletes who do not have any history, athletes that do not demonstrate a deficiency in core stability. So my methods, I had 54 participants, all college age. I had a mix of male and female, mostly female, for 3 King University sports teams. So I did men and women's volleyball and women's soccer. And just a note about why I chose these teams. So of the teams we have at King, the 3 teams with the highest rates of lower extremity injury would be soccer, basketball, and then volleyball. So considering that I was doing my testing starting in August and I had up until September when I had to present, these were the teams with the highest rates of lower extremity injury that were in season or somewhat in season, at least available for testing. So it would have been awesome to get basketball in there, but just the time that I was doing the testing, it just didn't work out. To measure core stability, I looked at 2 specific aspects of it. So I looked at core strength and core endurance. So to validate these, I used the functional movement screen and the McGill torso endurance test. So it's important to note that these were not tests that I created. These are clinically validated tests that are used all the time in the athletic training clinic and the physical therapy clinic. And their job is to validate or to give you a measurement of core stability. So it's not something I came up with. Also, the history of lower extremity was gathered as a self-reported report. So I asked 3 specific questions that detailed that history. And I'll show you guys those later on, but it's important to note that it was a self-reported history. Once I had all that raw data, I used a Pearson's R correlation, independent samples t-test, and descriptive analysis that I ran via SPSS. So once I had all of the injury history, I separated the groups up into 4 different groups. So group A is a single instance of lower extremity injury, but it did not require surgery. Group B would be at least 2 lower extremity injuries, but no lower extremity surgery. Group C would be a lower extremity injury that required lower extremity surgery. And group D is no lower extremity at all. Also, it's important to notice that I separated the groups by sex, but I did not differentiate by sport. So in a perfect world, I would have differentiated by sport because volleyball is a non-contact sport and soccer is a contact sport. So we do expect to find higher rates of lower extremity injury in the contact sport. But just the nature of only having 54 participants, I elected to keep them together. And since I was using humans as my test subjects, I had to thoroughly address the procedures and methods, risk and benefits, and confidentiality of the study. This is just all to maintain that ethical balance and make sure I wasn't doing anything that was going to harm anyone. In that, I had to do an informed consent form, which gave full disclosure to every participant so they knew beforehand exactly what I was going to be tested for, how I was using this information, and how I was going to keep their confidentiality safe. It's also important to notice that my study was approved on August 16th, which was before I did any sort of testing. So jumping straight into the FMS. So FMS is a series of 7 movement tests. So you'll recognize these kind of mimic sport-specific movements. So we have the deep squat, the hurdle step, the inline lunge, shoulder mobility, active straight leg raise, push-up, and rotary stability. So these 7 tests together evaluate the mobility, stability, and motor control and just kind of these basic fundamental sport-like movements. The reason why I chose these specifically for evaluating core strength is because it looks at the 3 different planes of motion that are important for the trunk. So transverse, frontal, and sagittal planes are all the planes of motion that we're moving through in these specific movements. And notice here that I highlighted 3 specific movements. So these, in order to keep the efficacy of the whole test and use the literature that supports that these these tests evaluate core strength, I did the whole test, all 7 movements with every participant. But what I was really interested in was looking at their scores on these three specific tests. So that is important to note later on. In scoring the FMS, so I am FMS level 1 certified. So I had to take a class this summer, I took a test, and I have a certification. So it is important to note that I was certified in FMS. So the scoring is very highly standardized, so that is important to note for whenever I did the data collection. So the FMS scoring can be a little bit complicated. Just kind of walk you guys through the basics of it. So of course, the setup and the requirements are going to be a little different for each test because we're testing different things. But if you got into the starting position and felt any pain throughout the movement, you receive a score of 0. If you were unable to perform the movement at all, it was a score of 1. If it was mostly correct but you had a little hiccups, it would be a score of 2. And then near perfect or perfect would be a score of 3. And so I have here kind of what it would look like for a deep squat to receive a score of 3, a 2, and a 1. So as I talk about this in a little more detail, I'm actually going to do a demonstration for you guys. So Leo, who is actually one of the volleyball players that I had the pleasure of testing this summer, is actually going to show us what a deep squat looks like. So I'll give you this. So in order to score a 3, you have to maintain the correct posture without the board. If he does this and is not able to maintain the correct posture, then we'll put him on the board. The board just makes it a little bit easier. So Leo, I'm going to have you put the down on top of your head, okay? And I'm going to adjust your feet a little bit. So bring this toe in just a little bit. You want your feet straight like this, hip distance apart. I scored. Okay. So we're looking for his elbows at a 90-degree angle, so you look good. So go ahead and press up, Leo. Okay, awesome. So squatting down as far as you can. You're going to maintain your toes forward, your hips on the same equal distance. Be sure not to kind of lean forward. So doing all of that, squat down and hold for 1 second. So whenever you're ready. 1, 2, come back up. All right, so what do you guys think? Is it a 3? Okay, do we have anybody 2? Think we need to move the board? Okay, so thank you so much, Leo. So I would give Leo a score of a 3. Now, if it was me doing this test instead of Leo, I would have definitely had to move to the board. So you would do the same type of movement that Leo just presented on the board instead. And if you did that perfectly, you would get a 2. But if you couldn't do it at all, it would be a score of 1. If you felt pain, it would be a score of 0. So what is a good FMS score? Well, a final FMS score of lower or equals to 14 is what we consider to be dysfunctional and predictive of injury. So this has been known for a while in the sports medicine world. As you can see, this study was published in 2007. But further and more recent research suggests that even a score below 17 is predictive of lower extremity injury. So this study was actually done by the same lab, not these same people, but it's interesting to kind of see as we do more fine-tuning and more research to see that kind of lower end kind of creep up a little bit. So the second series of tests that I did was the real torso test. So it is there's 4 tests in total. So you have the trunk extensor test, the bilateral side bridges, and the trunk flexion test. So if we take a look at the trunk flexion test, you'll notice that we have kind of a support back here. When the test started, we removed that away, so you would actually have to hold that V-sit. So it's not quite as easy as it looks here. So what we're doing here, as the name implies, is looking at core endurance. So we're letting the participant hold this position for as long as possible until we get muscle failure. So that gives us a pretty good indication of what the core endurance looks like as isometric contraction. So again, for those of you who haven't had AMP, isometric contraction is you're not having a lengthening or shortening of the muscles, and you're also looking at just one plane of motion, and you're isolating that one specific muscle group responsible for holding that position. So as I mentioned, we're doing this as a time component. So once you have your raw time scores, we're going to actually convert that into a ratio. So there's two different ratios that we look at. We look at flexion to extension, and optimal is less than 1. Right side bridge to left side bridge, the score should be no greater than 0.5 for the balance score of 1. And then we're looking at side bridge to extension, and we want that ratio to be no less than 0.75. So once we have those ratios, we're actually just looking to turn it into a binary score. So is it functional or is it not functional? So this is also, as promised, kind of our 3 questions that we asked to get a sense of what their lower extremity injury history is like. So to walk you guys through this and why I asked it in a specific way. So we start out with, have you ever been diagnosed with an injury to a lower extremity at or below the hip joint? So this is defining what a lower extremity injury is. So I had a blank where if they checked yes, they would put what injury it was. If they weren't sure, then they would have another spot that they would write what it was. And then it was up to my discretion whether to include that as a lower extremity injury or not. The second part is it must be diagnosed by a licensed MD, AT, or PT. And that's just defining and giving authority to who is licensed to diagnose these. So it's not a coach, it's not your mom told you. We're kind of having that nice clinically validated person to diagnose. Also, there's a time component to this as well. So we're looking at least 48 hours off from the sport of qualified as an injury. Also, I asked for if they've ever had surgery on a lower extremity injury. I did collect what that was, just to kind of see if we had what the severity of it, but I didn't want to take that into account with the data analysis. And then the third question protects the students and also protects me. Because if they are clear to participate in their sport, then they're clear to do any of the tests that I'm asking. But also, in part of being a fully disclosed study, if anyone was hesitant to do any of the tests for fear of injury, then I didn't force them to. They were able to drop out at any point. So it's important to note that the overall results, there was no statistically significant findings with any of the correlations that were in. But actually, this nice chart here shows you kind of a breakdown between the males and female participants. So as you remember, I broke those down even further, just between males and females. And that's because females are 4 to 6 times more likely to sustain a lower extremity injury than a male that's playing that same sport. And that has to do a lot with female anatomy. So females have a wider hip, more flared hips, and a narrower stance. So that affects what is called a Q angle. And it's shown that an increased Q angle is correlated with a higher rate of injury. Also, the female hormones, specifically estrogen, are linked to kind of showing laxity in joint ligaments. So that could be one of the reasons why we see females sustaining more lower extremity injuries than males. So for those 2 reasons, I only analyzed the female data on females. So if we see the breakdown here, you notice that we do have kind of a small number of participants. And then our total number here, so since I broke them apart to kind of look specifically at females because they are more likely to be injured, in order to run an independent samples t-test, you have to have a minimum number of 30. So that's another reason why I only did descriptive analysis on the females, is because we just barely met that baseline. But I want you guys to pay attention to these breakdowns between groups. So the people who reported one lower extremity injury, we did have slightly more females than males. But when you make the jump to 2 lower extremity injury, we have almost the same number reporting, but we have twice as many females reporting 2 or more lower extremity injuries. And then when we make the jump to lower extremity surgery, the vast majority are female compared to males. This is an interesting part as well. So even though females are 4 to 6 times more likely to sustain a lower extremity injury, we kind of saw that this number split 50-50, which is interesting to realize. So looking at the specific results of the test, notice that we are analyzing this only for female college athletes. So here on the x-axis we have our groups. So just to give you guys a refresher, this is 1 lower extremity injury. This is 2 lower extremity injuries. This is lower extremity injury that required surgery, and the group D was no lower extremity injury whatsoever. Then on our y-axis here, we have the mean FMS composite score, so that's the average of the scores for each group. Also notice we have 14 marked here. So 14 is the lower end of what our cutoff is considered safe and acceptable for an FMS score for athletes. And then up here at 17, that's the higher end of our cutoff. So when we take a look specifically at Group B and C, we notice that their mean FMS composite score is lower than Group D and Group A. But what's really important here is to notice that we have our standard deviations here which show our range, that we have individuals scoring at or below this 14 point. So all of this is not statistically significant, it is clinically relevant because we're seeing individuals score kind of in that danger zone or even below. Another important thing to realize about this graph is on our upper mark of the 17, we have individuals in each group scoring below what's kind of more recently considered as optimal. So that's actually super interesting to see. With the McGill torso test, it's not quite as nice and clear on the results that we had here, but we do see a slight decrease in the mean time, specifically between for groups A, B, and C as compared to group D. So to orient you guys to this graph, on the x-axis here we have lower extremity injury status. On the y-axis we have the mean trunk extension time in seconds. So remember when we talked about scoring the McGill torso test, we talked about it in terms of a ratio. When we actually ran the data for this specific test, and those ratios were all over the place. So that's kind of, as you can see, we have huge margins of standard deviation. So that data didn't really make a whole lot of sense. So we kind of just have to take a step back and look at it and say, well, how can we use this and what is the natural progression from here? So remember we talked about the multifidus and the transverse abdominis being kind of our key players. It's actually in this mean trunk extension, so that's the one where you're doing a plank off the table. You're really relying on kind of these back muscles. So your multifidus muscle runs up the spine, and the transverse abdominis comes this way. So when we're testing endurance, we're testing specifically those two muscles and how long they can hold the isometric traction. So current research shows that the greater endurance a muscle has, the lower risk that it has for sustaining an injury. So kind of extrapolating that to low extremity injury as well. That's why we chose to look at this in kind of a different light. So even then we don't have really nice results, really distinctive results, we do kind of see a drop in the mean trunk extension time for any of the groups that reported injury compared to the group that did not report injury. So there's some other factors that might have kind of swayed the not having any statistically significant data. Is the time constraints that I had to work with. So just the overall length of the study. Testing in August and having to report in September doesn't give me a whole lot of time to kind of use other methods. So also doing more sports, having more numbers of participants would have helped as well. And then also on the day of testing, it takes about 4 to 5 hours to do a testing for a whole team. And that was me also with helpers as well, so volunteers that helped me out. So you're looking at fatigue for the athletes, because I did the FMS first, because that's the most mentally challenging, but also physically challenging. So kind of, if I was to go back and do this study again, I would look into breaking those up, because if you stand around for 2 or 3 hours, you're going to be a little bit tired, and you're not really going to want to hold the plank for as long as possible. So that's another factor to consider. So anytime you rely on anything that's self-reported, there's always going to be a margin of error. So if I was given more time to do this study, I would probably look into actually monitoring the injuries myself. But just the nature of the time constraints was kind of a factor to that. Also, I mentioned we don't have as many sports available for choosing at King. So it would be interesting to look at football is actually like the #1 lower extremity injury sport. Also, I would like to look at lacrosse and then do the monitoring for the basketball team as well, testing the basketball team, and see if that gives you any different results. Since I have volunteers working with me who, for example, were not trained in the FMS, they're kind of getting secondhand knowledge from me. So at that point, you're worried about inter-rater reliability. So somebody might be scoring these tests a little bit differently than how I would score them, and so that kind of shows you a little bit of variance as well. Also, the equipment. So if you notice, FMS kit that I have down here is basically just a chunk of wood and a dowel. So I actually created that with the help of my dad and myself. So there is an FMS kit to buy, but just the nature of being at a smaller school, I did not have the money to do that. So I actually had to just kind of problem solve and create that myself. So that would be another factor if I was going to redo this study, is make sure I have proper equipment that's kind of gold standardized. So in conclusion, all of these go statistically significant findings. The FMS composite and McGill trunk extension times for females with a history of lower extremity injury were lower than those that did not report a, those times were lower than those that did not report a history of lower extremity injury or surgery at all. So this observation suggests that female collegiate athletes with a history of lower extremity injury are more likely to possess a deficient core stability, but more research is needed. Also, we saw that females are more likely than males to sustain a lower extremity injury and or report surgery. So as I kind of alluded to, some ideas for future study would be more participants, definitely. It would also be interesting to see a more expected breakdown of males to females. So to do that, we would kind of have to have a more equal representation of males to females within our population. Also, I'd like to look, as I mentioned, sports with higher injury risk and see how the core stability plays out there. Also, this is where I kind of originally intended my project to go towards, is to monitor for future non-contact injuries, because what you can do is actually run what's called a logistic regression analysis. So specifically based on the FMS, you can kind of predict how likely somebody is to sustain an injury based on what their scores were. But to do that, you have to have way more than a month's worth of monitoring. So if I was to ever pick up this study again, that's probably what I would go with. I would also be interested to see other methods of measuring core stability. So I didn't even address neuromuscular control or proprioception, which are also two important parts of core stability. I just focused on strength and endurance. So these are all my references. And I just want to take this time to acknowledge a few people. So Appalachian College Association for giving me the Ledford Scholarship, which enabled me to do this research. Also, both the biology and athletic training departments at King for kind of giving me the background knowledge and supporting me through all of this. And all of the faculty that helped me throughout this whole project. All of my volunteers for helping me do whatever I asked, whatever I needed them to. And then also the coaches for allowing me to use their team, and all of the participants in my study. Several of you guys are here today, so thank you guys so much. And also thank you guys for listening to my talk. And I would love to hear what kind of questions you guys have. Yes, Dr. Miller.
It looked like, and the people that didn't pass your test, just implicitly that one of the main reasons was that they suffered pain. And another thing that you sort of implicitly said is that maybe in their core muscular structure that they didn't have sufficient strength. I'm wondering whether other factors like flexibility or any other thing, what were some of the key factors that you were sort of observing that caused the lack of core stability?
Right. So if they were sustaining pain, then that just means so really what happens when somebody has pain is they need to be referred on, because as I mentioned, this is a test that's used in the clinic, specifically for AT and PT, so it's looking at those basic sports movements. So if somebody did score pain, that's more, they get a score of 0 because there's something going on there in their musculoskeletal system that is not functional. So that's where a score of pain. So that might not necessarily be related